Lovely. So, welcome everyone. Welcome back from the break. My name, like I said, is Shanna Challenger, OICP coordinator, and we are now going to take a deep dive into our first deep dive of ECCO, which is focused on science. And how many scientists we have in the house? Yeah, y'all don't be afraid. I'll even accept the social scientists. Sorry, I'll even accept you guys, right? Science, it is one of the best fields, even though I'm very biased. I love learning about new things, and I think it's so cool, the kind of things we're able to accomplish with science. And so I'm very excited to be facilitating this session. On our panel today, we have representatives from 4 organizations here within Antigua and Barbuda. First, we have, well, I'll let them introduce themselves, man. Right? Oh, Chaz? Maybe it's a cue that I need to introduce them myself. But the organizations.
Hi.
Okay, we're ready.
Good morning. My name is Rulita Camacho Thomas, and I'm from the National Parks Authority.
Hi, good morning. My name's Alex Fireman. I work with EAG as the Antigua Marine Conservation Program Coordinator.
Hi, good morning everyone again. Jabari Reynolds from the Department of Environment. I'm an Environmental Information Systems Consultant.
And I'm Molly Wilson. I'm with the Elkhorn Marine Conservancy.
And I'm Geneviève Renaud-Byrne, and I'm also with the Elkhorn Marine Conservancy.
Alrighty, thank you. And so throughout this session, we are going to have each of these representatives tell us a little bit about their work and how they're making contributions through science for Antigua and Barbuda. So I'd like to invite Mrs. Rolita Camacho Thomas to step down and give her presentation, and we're very excited to hear from her. Give her some encouragement.
All right, good morning, everybody. Let me see where I'm going to stand. Let me stand on this side. That's better. All right, how many of you know what the National Parks Authority is? Right. Can you name one park that the National Parks Authority manages? No. All right. All right. So, all of you are wrong. All right. So, I'm going to take a little bit of editor's privilege here. And what I'd like to do is, before we go into the science and the data, I think with any scientific exercise, it's important before you just go and start to collect data that you know why you're doing it, who are the audiences you serve, and what the results and the outcomes you're expecting are. So the first thing is the National Parks Authority is a statutory organization that was formed in 1984 by legislation. The National Parks Authority is a self-financing agency, and under the legislation that formed the National Parks Authority, during the time that the legislation was being passed, one park was created. That park is the Nelson's Dockyard National Park. So when you drive into Dockyard and you get to the gate, that's what everybody thinks is the national park. That's actually not the national park. The Nelson's Dockyard National Park runs from Carlisle Bay all the way down here. It goes up to Signal Hill. It comes across the ridge, right across, comes back down, goes across over Memorial Bay, comes back down into a point off Standfast Point, and then goes straight back across to outside of Carlisle Bay. If you were to add a boundary onto this, it would be joined with the boundary of the Cades Bay Marine Reserve. So the Nelson's Dockyard National Park includes both terrestrial, land, and sea. It is a Category 6 IUCN park, which means that they're mixed uses. It's not strict conservation. On the scale of national parks or protected areas, under the international classifications, you can go from 1 to 6. 1 being extreme conservation, nothing can happen, you're just protecting biodiversity and nature, and 6 being mixed uses. We are at 6. Right, within the national park, in 26, anybody remember when I told you the national parks, the Nelson's Dockyard National Park was established? When? 84, right. So between 1984 and 2016, we were just managing this area according to our legislation. Our legislation speaks about managing, preserving, and developing ecosystems, natural resources, heritage, economy, and social systems. In 2016, we applied successfully to UNESCO, and we had designated within the boundaries of the Nelson's Dockyard National Park the Antigua Naval Dockyard World Heritage Site, and this is in the boundaries in the red. Right. There are lots of communities in the national park. It's not just biodiversity and nature, so we have several communities, and about 4,000 people live in the national park. In terms of activities that happen, other than just nature, biodiversity, natural resources, we have marinas, boatyards, a port of entry, schools, hotels, guest houses, mechanics, restaurants, laundries, any activity that you can imagine happening in Antigua happens in a national park. Any ecosystem that you can imagine in Antigua also occurs in the Nelson's Dockyard National Park. And therefore, when we are collecting data, we have to think about all of those entities. We have to think about economic purposes of the data. We have to think about social purposes of the data, sociocultural practices of the people that exist in the community, the commercial uses, the interactions between. Now, today I'm going to focus on some of the data that we collect, some of the environmental data we collect. But in applying the uses, we're going to apply them to all of those 3 pillars. So we're going to apply them back to natural resources management, to economic issues, and to socioeconomic issues and livelihoods issues and sociocultural issues. So the first thing I want to tell you about is the water. So water is critical to us. We know that, right? But we don't often think about what happens when you don't get water from APA. But when you do get it, right? When we do get it, right, and we use it, and it's processed, it has to go somewhere. All of the water at any point in the Nelson's Dockyard National Park will eventually end up in the sea. These are the hydrological features. The red things are the shapes of our watershed areas, and all of them lead to the sea. So when we're thinking about water in the park, yes, we're concerned about how much water you get in your homes, but we really want to know what happens after. And so one of our primary data collection exercises is collecting data on water quality. So we want to know what quality of water, after you finish use it, after it runs off the land, what is entering the marine environment. So twice a year, we conduct a 4-week testing. We collaborate with the Central Board of Health, the Department of Analytical Services, the Department of Environment, and we collect this data. So we have about 20 points around the coastline. Of course, we focus on where human beings are because, we are always the problem. And we focus on where we know there are drains coming out into the sea. And we also focus on where humans interact with the water. Anybody can guess why we focus on those 2 areas? Guess? Guess. Elisha, why? No, why? Yeah, why? Why we don't just go out into the middle of the sea and take water quality data from there?
I suppose the water that comes from testing. I suppose that the water that comes from our home, it's not in the middle of the sea, it's closer to the coastline, and so you'd want to test the quality of that water instead.
Wonderful. Excellent. Okay, so our harbors are very well flushed, very high circulation. So we used to take water from in the middle here, and we found nothing. However, we're taking water from the sources, so point source, right? So we take from the drain and in front of the drain. So we take in the drain and then outside of the drain for the point sources, so where we know water is going into the ocean, and then we also just take where you interact. What we have found is that there are some areas within the Nelson's Dockyard National Park that have high levels of enterococci and fecal coliform, very concentrated in a small area. However, when you go and test the bathing areas, it's not there. Now, what do we do with this data? So we have the data. As a managing authority, what do we do? So what we've done with the data is we have said to the Central Board of Health, hey, we have a problem here. People are discharging their waste untreated into the marine environment, which is causing pollution. We have picked up the effect. We have the data on the effect. Because we now have cause and effect, we are able to lobby government agencies to go into individual businesses. We are doing dye testing, which is another data point. So we are checking to see which businesses, which households are actually releasing their waste. So the next thing that we do, we throw eco-friendly dye down the toilets, the kitchen drains, your showers, and we see where it comes out. And we've been doing this exercise since 2020, and what we have been able to, the result is that we've gotten CBH to come in and require that those businesses, those buildings correct their wastewater, right? So we collect the data, we understand what the issue is, we go and find the exact source of the issue, then we call in the regulatory authority, having presented the evidence, and then lobby for the change to be made. All right, next one is our marine ecosystem. So Rulio Camacho, who is online, runs our marine ecosystem program, right? And we do agri-surveys, seagrass monitoring, wetland monitoring, and turtle monitoring in conjunction with the Environmental Awareness Group. The actions that we are taking, so our marine program is relatively young. We are just starting data collection. But some of the interventions that we have already made, we have installed no prop areas in some of the popular swimming beaches because we've found that we have anchor damage at beaches, we have propeller damage, and also there's too much interaction between vessels with propellers and nature and people. Remember I told you we are also managing for the people, and as human beings, we also access the natural resource. So in the collection of our data, we also have to pay attention to how we can help to manage the interaction between people and other people, nature, and people and nature. Okay? In terms of protection and managing of coral reefs, we like the Elkhorn Marine Conservancy, we have a coral tree project. I'm not going to talk much about that. It's in its early stages, but we are growing coral for outplanting, and it's the same thing that Elkhorn is doing, so I won't talk much about that because I'm just going to repeat what they're doing. All right, so we have temperature loggers and so on, and we do, every 2 years we do what is called an agri-survey, where we collect data on the status of the marine ecosystem, and what we're doing is we are making interventions towards developing a marine spatial plan. So marine spatial plan, so we're collecting the data now. We haven't done anything with it yet except for experimenting on certain conservation type programs, but the end point will be a marine conservation plan. The parks management has already agreed that we need a marine conservation plan. But as scientists, we don't want to just protect this area and then see what happens. We want to be sure that we understand who will be impacted when we protect an area and how they will be impacted. Because at the end of the day, when we present this area for conservation and protection and for regulation of use, we want to make sure that we have enough information so that the persons affected can understand why we're doing it and how they will be impacted and what benefit they're getting from it, right? People value things that they benefit from. We have to be able to use data as scientists to communicate how you are going to benefit. I know my 10 minutes running out fast. How much time I have? Where's the timekeeper? All right, I'm gonna move it along, Okay, our terrestrial program is wide and diverse. Remember I told you we had a lot of communities, people living in the park. Also lots of hotels and developments, and also lots of private land that are going to be developed. So, like the marine programs, we had, well, unlike the marine program, when the park was developed, a land categorization plan was developed. Now, that only said, like, this is for heritage, this is for conservation. All the heritage areas and all the conservation areas, everything developed. So what we need to do now is, moving forward, we need to have a more practical way of saying how to protect the critical ecosystems and critical species. And in order to do that, we have to understand how these ecosystems are interacting. We also need to understand how much resilience buffer needs to be in place for these ecosystems to be able to adapt themselves. The ecosystems are not going to remain the same. Things are changing. What we have to do is understand how much space we need to make sure is intact for them to continue changing. And that we have to manage in the context of somebody wanting to bulldoze the land and develop it, right? So what we've done is, we don't have enough data to make the accurate decisions on all of the land. We have made some precautionary decisions. In areas where it's very steeply sloped, so let me go back to this map. So you see all of these areas where it's running straight to the sea, very steep slopes. So in those areas, we have a rule that if you're going to develop those lands, you have to, this is the map I want, right? See all of these contours here? Anybody can read contours? The closer together the lines are, is the steeper it is, right? So on any lands that are on those steep slopes, we have a requirement that you must maintain 50% canopy cover on your land. So you can build if you want. However, you have to maintain 50% of the land covered by trees. So the canopy of the tree has to cover 50% of your land. Secondly, we don't want you to clear more than the building footprint. So you have to have a road, you have to have a road. You have to build a building, fine, clear the building, but don't clear down the whole land. Also, if there's a waterway, we require you to maintain a setback from that waterway. And if the land is steep, you have to do terracing to control the volume of the runoff, and that will help slow down erosion. Because remember I told you, everything that comes off the land goes into the sea, right? Here it is. This, I don't know where it's gone. It's disappeared. I deleted a slide, apparently. All right, but in any case, everything that runs off the land, including the water, and the water can carry sediment in it, which is very bad for the coral reefs. All right, I'm going to get to the end now. Right. So, I'm deleting slides, guys. I don't know what's happening. All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about vegetation, unfortunately I can't find the vegetation slide anymore, is that we are, thank you. So vegetation. So we did a vegetation survey in 2013, and we found that all of these dots that you're seeing there, those represent either threatened or endangered or species of plants that are in need of special conservation. So one of the things we do is, when we are looking at areas that are under development, we identify these species on the land and we ask for them to be conserved. If they cannot be conserved, we ask for you to replace them with at least 2 or 3 of the same species, right? Again, there's private land in the park. We have to balance economic development with the fact that people want places to live with conservation. So we always try to find a balance. We have information to inform us what's there. We want you to replace what's there. Our goal is that we can facilitate the continued functioning and healthy functioning of the ecosystem while we as human beings interact with it. Let me talk about some of our data gaps. We don't have much data on geology. The park is geologically diverse. You can see coral reefs on the top of Monks Hill, and you can see pyroclastic flows down on Fort Berkeley. So when you go up here, right on the top of the hill, there are coral reefs. Go up there, look in the ground, you see. There is foraminifera. Anybody know what foraminifera is? No? No? So foraminifera is that thing that formed in the ocean long time before humans existed. There are some little organisms. We see them in the rocks, all here and all across here. So can you imagine what happened here? Suppose this was a crater of a volcano and it blew off, right? Blew out here, and then all of this formed. We don't know. We need to do some more work on that. Reason why we need to do some more work on that: one, we need to understand the soils, the soil base, and what type of vegetation can grow on what soil. Again, how much buffer do we need? Do we need to be conserving more of this soil type to allow this ecosystem to continue to function? Do we need to conserve more of another soil type? We also need to know how water flows in this community. So we had a spring down here that has disappeared. It just completely disappeared. We suspect that the water was coming somewhere from in here, and during development, something got blocked off, and now we don't have the spring anymore. We don't understand these things, so we need to do a little more data collection, a little more baseline data collection to understand geography and hydrogeology of the area to be able to make decisions. As a management authority, having to interact with the three systems. So there's pressure for economic development, and we are mandated to facilitate economic development. As a matter of fact, we are supposed to provide an environment to enhance economic development in our area for the benefit of our communities, right? We have the biggest yachting center in the Eastern Caribbean right here, while at the same time, right next to the yacht, we're trying to protect the coral reef, and we're also trying to protect the seagrass beds. We have to have data to be able to support our decision-making process. I can't just go up there and say, hey, the cruise ship shouldn't anchor there. They're going to ask me why. I have to have data to say why. And this is why data is important, and this is why before you start collecting data, you need to understand what questions you are going to answer with the data. It will better inform the design of your data collection protocols, and it won't make you waste time. You will actually be able to use the data and not just put it in a document on a shelf in an Excel file somewhere and you don't ever look at it again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rolita. I'm not sure we have time for many questions, but are there any? Josh in the front, we have a question.
Yeah, hi. My name's Joe Cross. I work at AUA. We do work with my students and other people. We monitor biodiversity through a process called DNA barcoding, where we look at a short region of the DNA of any species, plants, animals, fish, and we can identify what species we have. And I was just interested how you're identifying. You mentioned that in your surveys of the land and the marine environment, that you get an idea of what plants are actually on someone's land. How do you know what species you have? How do you do that survey, if I can ask?
Well, first of all, I didn't do it. So we brought in some experts, local experts in vegetation, and they went onto the land and they looked at the taxonomic profile and they identified the species. Now, in the report that we have from that exercise, so anything that we're doing in the national parks, we map it, right? So we don't just collect data, we map it so that we can record where it's coming from. One of the cautions that the consultant who did the work on our behalf indicated that there are some species that he was not able to identify. It could be this, it could be that. Work like yours would come into play there, because then we need further taxonomic classification to understand what this really is. So there are about 20 plants that were found that are questionable. So if you'd like me to send you that list and show you where they are, maybe we can incorporate that into some of your programs.
Thank you. Oh, there's a lot of questions. Okay.
Thank you for an awfully beautiful presentation.
One second, Wendy. We have a question here. Sorry, we'll bring the mic to you.
My question is the whole issue about the night soil and the level of the water table in St. John's and the disposal of the night soil. Have you done any work recently on that? Does that come under your ambit? Thank you.
So, no, it doesn't. We don't work with St. John's at all. We only work in the Nelson's Dockyard National Park. And with respect to the impacts that we are seeing is that traditional soak-away wastewater treatment facilities do not work around the coastline because as the sea level rises, when you dig, the water is right there. So there's no way for it to drain, which is why we suspect we have some of these water quality problems because persons would have gotten approval for the building of a traditional soak-away system, and it doesn't work, so they ended up just putting a pipe straight into the road. I would advise you or suggest that all of us, the next time you're driving and you're a passenger, just look at the side of the road. You're going to see how many pipes are leading straight into the road. It's not just around the coastline. We have very low-lying areas in Antigua. We do not understand the hydrogeology of Antigua properly, and there are many places where our traditional wastewater treatment does not work. This is why our roads are bad, because everybody's putting their wastewater into the gutter, and then it doesn't drain away properly. I can answer the question. You want to know what work we do on Sargassum? Well, fortunately for us, not many of our areas are impacted by Sargassum. Memorial Bay and Indian Creek are the most heavily impacted in terms of inundation. So those are on the eastern side of the park. Our marine ecologist does do tracking. We profile it. And he is involved in tracking the research on what we can do with it. But as I said to you, that is more of a national issue. We keep track of it, but there's nothing we can actively do. The other impact from Sargassum that we are seeing is on Rendezvous Beach, and that has an impact on erosion rates, especially in the turtle nesting season. That is very dangerous because what happens is it pulls away the area that the turtles have laid their nest, and then the nests get destroyed. Now, there may be other impacts. We note that the fishermen have reported to us that areas like Memorial Bay and Indian Creek are, in their words, dead. There's nothing in it. The sargassum has sunk and killed everything. We would love to do more work on understanding that, but again, we have to prioritize our data collection based on the responses we have to make. We can't do anything about that right now. We note it, we record it, and we move on, and we hope that at some point, somebody can give us a few $1 billion to go and restore Memorial Bay, but that's what it will take. It will take billions of dollars to restore these ecosystems.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Rulita Camacho Thomas. We're going to give her another clap. And I would like to invite our next presenter, who is Ms. Alexandra Fireman from the Environmental Awareness Group, to make her way down. She is the Antigua Marine Conservation Program Coordinator. Let's give her some encouragement. And I always say, the person who can figure out how we can make sargassum into rum, I'm ready. I'm ready for us to make some money. Oh, there's a question on Zoom. Okay, Zoom, let me hear from you. Can you unmute, please, Zoom? Oh, they typed it. Sorry, what is the question?
It's just a statement, really.
Oh, it's a statement.
Yes. We from AUA, along with Department of Analytics, conducted a pilot study on meta-barcoding of bacteria in water sources. You mentioned about enterococci in marine water. The bacteria is cultured or molecularly identified. It's very interesting as it may lead to multi-drug resistance.
Thank you, AUA. And I'm sure there will be some potential collaborations with national parks and AUA in the future. All righty, let's hear from Ms. Fireman. we're probably going to have to take all of the questions at the end. So what I'd like for everybody to do is just note down your question, and then at the end we will hear from everybody. Thank you, Alice. Take it away.
Thank you. Yes, like Shanna said, my name is Alex Fireman. I am the coordinator for the Antigua Marine Conservation Program. It's a mouthful, but we shorten it to the AMCP. And of course, I work at the EAG. So thank you guys all so much for being here today. So Rulita teased some turtle stuff a little bit, so I'm going to go a little bit further into that. But we'll start with what is the AMCP. So you guys might know that the EAG has 3 programs. Okay, good. Has 3 programs, and the Antigua Marine Conservation Program obviously focuses on the marine ecosphere. Are we good? Yeah, okay. And in particular, we have a focus on endangered marine species and imperiled habitats. So within the last year or 2, our current work focus and research has been specifically on the sea turtles in Antigua. And even more specifically, we have been focusing on the nesting sea turtle populations. So we know that there are turtles in water in Antigua, and there are turtles that come up to nest. So I ask, why might we focus to start on just the nesting sea turtles as opposed to the turtles in water? Any thoughts? Maybe someone could raise their hand.
Perpetuating the species, because as I understand with turtles, I think it's something crazy like 1 in every 1,000 survive to maturity.
Right.
So the foraging ones are probably okay-ish.
So all sea turtle species are imperiled, unfortunately, regardless of what life stage they're at. They're all facing threats. But you're correct that the nesting population, they're focusing on reproduction, so that's an important time to target them for conservation. I'll pose these 2 activities against each other, and I'll ask you if someone could raise their hand and tell me which of these activities looks more intensive, just from looking at them. I see someone pointing to the boat. Any other thoughts? The first one, yeah. Which one looks like it might cost more money? The first one. Okay. And which one looks like it might be more invasive for the turtle itself? The first one, yeah. So yeah, there are a lot of benefits to going out into the water and learning about sea turtles in the water where they're foraging, but it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, and it's just a lot of work too, to get out there on these boats, to get out and capture these sea turtles, haul them onto a boat, collect all the data you need. Although they are marine organisms, sea turtles very conveniently like to come up onto land to where we are so that we can study them a little bit more easily. So yeah, they can be accessed from the land. Sea turtles like to return fairly predictably as well to the same locations at predictable times, which means that we can know sort of more or less when they're going to be there. The sea turtles, when they're actually laying their eggs on the beach, they go into what we call a nesting trance, where they're not moving, they're very unbothered by their environment, and that time period gives us a really nice time when we can go and actually collect our data without disturbing the turtle at all. And the other benefit to looking at nesting turtles is that we can observe multiple life stages. So we can intercept the turtles as they're nesting here, so we get the adult females, the adult reproductive females, but then we also get a look at the clutches, the eggs as they're in the sand, and then a third life stage of the hatchlings as they're going down to the water. So we can get a lot of information just to going out to these nesting beaches and learning about this marine organism. So that's a little insight into how we choose our methods for data collection. So what data do we actually collect? We're out on the nesting beach, we go out at night. As you might know, sea turtles in Antigua tend to nest at nighttime. So we have it sort of broken out into 3 sections that we collect data on. We'll start with the nesting turtle, so the actual female, what she's doing, the nest environment, where the nest has been laid, and then the hatching event. So the sort of bread and butter of most nesting programs is tagging. So each turtle that comes up onto the beach, as soon as we encounter her, one of the first things that we do is we give her metal flipper tags that have a unique number letter combination on them. And that allows us to identify her every time she comes back and we encounter her. And that can give us good information about how many nests one individual turtle will lay, how many years it takes between nesting events, all that sort of good information that we need. We will take measurements of the turtle herself, other morphological data, like what she looks like, and then any physical observations that we might notice. Moving on to the nest environment, we will collect information like the GPS points, where it was located, the lat long of the nest, the distance from the nest to the high tide line, the nest depth, how close it is to vegetation, and the cover over the nest. So is it shaded or is it out in the open sun? And then last, once those hatchlings actually leave the nest, we can go in and evaluate the nest itself. We can look at the number of eggs that were in the clutch, the time and date that the hatchlings decided to get up and leave the nest, and then evaluate things like hatching success, so how many of those eggs actually hatched into a little baby turtle, and emergence success, so how many of those eggs actually became a turtle and then got up and left. And then, of course, across all three of these, we always have to focus on the threats, because as I said, sea turtles face threats at all life stages in all habitats, so across all three of those, we're always documenting the threats that they're facing. So how is this data used? I have this spreadsheet that's just filled with like columns and columns and columns of data that we collected last year. What are we actually doing with it? So I'll start with tagging, because like I said, it's like sort of the most important part for us. The big thing with tagging is that we're able to estimate abundance. So how many turtles are actually coming up to Antigua to nest? With the morphological data, we can look at things like growth rates and age of the turtles that are here. With the clutch data, we can look at how reproductively successful the turtles were, or their overall reproductive output. And with the environment, we can start to answer questions about things like nest site selection. Where do the turtles like to go, and why? So then we have to take it one step further, right? Like we have all these sort of things, and then we need to actually synthesize them into usable outputs. So with estimating abundance, if we start to collect this data over long periods of times, we can start to observe the trends of the populations, which is critical for these endangered species, right? We need to know, are the turtles that are coming to Antigua, are their populations increasing, which would be great? Are they decreasing, which is sound the alarms, or are they staying sort of relatively the same? With growth and age information, we can look at the health and status, things like body condition, how big are the turtles that are coming here, are they doing okay, or do they need some extra support maybe in their foraging areas? With the reproductive output, like I said earlier, we can look at the success. How well are the turtles doing once they actually come up here? Are they laying clutches of eggs, but none of the eggs are hatching? Because that would be a critical piece of information that we need. And then last, of course, looking at the location. Where are the turtles coming up? Why do they like certain spots? Where do we need to be focusing our efforts to give the most protection to these species? So we've synthesized into these four, I'm just like going through the scientific process here. We synthesize into these four groups of data. We have these trends, we understand what they're doing, and then we can start to really get into conservation questions and figure out how we can best manage them. So we can answer questions like, where are sea turtles declining the most rapidly? Where do they most need our actions and our money and our help? How successful are the turtles, and what factors into their success? Are turtles that nest on certain beaches producing way more eggs than turtles on other beaches, and why might that be? And then what areas require the most protection, which sort of integrates the last two. So of course, we also have to get into how that actually translates into policy. What are we doing with those questions and those answers that we have? So all of that data, all those questions that we have now answered with all of our wonderful data, can go into policy decisions such as beachfront lighting ordinances, coastal development management, so that things like this don't happen. This poor turtle ended up in a pool in Barbados, so it was right next to the beach. Natural resource protection, so protecting things like native coastal vegetation, the sand on the beaches. Without those two things, obviously the turtles are not going to be able to nest at all. We need to be considering climate change in basically every policy decision that happens from here on out, and that, in both the current effects and the future effects that we'll be seeing. So you can see just what we were talking about earlier with the sargassum and the erosion. This is one of our nesting beaches that isn't looking so good. We need to make sure that we're enforcing the protections and laws that are already in place. And of course, we can't forget the global advocacy on an international scale. So these policy decisions, all of those things that I just mentioned, of course, they need to be backed by scientific data. And having numbers and statistics can be really influential. If I say that 95% of all nests on one beach were impacted by artificial light, that's so much more effective than just saying artificial light is a known threat, right? If you hear that number, which is more or less true, it means a lot to policymakers. And I just want to end with one thought also, that policies, we've mostly focused here on government, but policies can be internal to businesses, they can be internal to groups, to community organizations, and they can also be sort of individual or personal policies. So things like the red lights, that might come from a government enacting a policy that says, okay, all lights around beaches need to be red. Businesses could seek out things like sea turtle friendly certifications, make sure that all of their business practices are doing things that are in the best interest of these animals. And then you can also make personal decisions, such as removing trash from the beach. So I think policy sort of spans all of those areas. That's it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Alex. I would like to remind everybody about those things that Erika said that we have that make noises. And I'm hearing some noises. So I'd like to remind us to put our phones on silent just so we can give our presenters our full attention. So next up, we have the rose in between the thorns, or the thorn in between the roses. There's too many men in here for me to make that joke. But I'd like to invite Mr. Jabari Reynolds from the Department of Environment, Monitoring, Evaluation, and Data Management Unit to give his presentation, which will be up in 3, 2, 1. And as a reminder, we will be taking questions at the end. So if you had any questions about our nesting sea turtles, don't worry, just jot them down in your ECCO notebooks, and you'll get a chance to ask them at the end. Take it away, Jabari.
Thank you, Shanna. Hello, testing, brilliant. Again, thank you everyone for coming here. My presentation is entitled The Science for Decision Making. Again, my name is Jabari Reynolds. I'm representing the organization of the Department of Environment. My unit is the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Data Management Unit. We have 3 key objectives for today. So today, I'm trying to answer, how does the Department of Environment collect data? Second, how are we using science for decision making? And thirdly, once the data has been collected, how does it inform our next steps in policy? Before I jump into the first slide, my distinguished panelists, first Ms. Rolita Camacho touched about the history of why we would collect data. Then we went into the processes of collecting the data. But first off the bat, what is data? When we look at these multi-dollar, billion-dollar companies, they all have something in common. They all collect data. These companies have been in existence for hundreds of years, and they've utilized this key, data science, in keeping relevant in our today's society. Data can be defined as a factual information such as the measurement or statistics used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, decision-making, or calculation. Now we look at our benefits of data collection, or data. I know I have around 5 points, but let me go to it. So we're looking at the predicting of trends, driving profits, making better decision making, optimize the quality of work, and draw valuable insights. I know all of us here are from varying institutions, walks of society, but could you provide, benefits other than the ones listed here that data plays in your organization? Okay.
Testing. As a journalist, it allows me to formulate a better story, to connect the data with the people and what is important to them.
Brilliant. I'll take one more if anyone wants to. I think my colleague over there. No? No? Okay.
I think as repeating from previous presenters, it allows you to make better decisions based on facts rather than what might be in your imagination.
Yes. And if you can provide persons with the percentage, that cements your argument.
Exactly, but also data can be in so many different frames and views and angles, so people can make what they need to out of it without distorting it, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. How is data collected by the department now? The Department of Environment, we collect our data through a participatory approach which seeks to involve our stakeholders in monitoring and reporting of data. Alongside this approach, the DOE utilizes institutional arrangements such as Memorandum of Understandings to create avenues for data sharing. To just share some knowledge about our MOUs, we currently have 2. We have one with the Statistics Division, the AG, and we're currently looking to bring along the Antigua and Barbuda's Transport Board, as well as a recycling company known as Wills Recycling. Which unit is responsible for data collection? What's my unit? All right. So, short for DMU. So we're really responsible for tracking our projects, our NDCs, our naturally determined contributions, and our environmental data. So then the instruments for data collection. So I have a few here. The unmanned aircraft system, the drones, yes. And we use those for mangrove mapping. So I know most of us are aware what our mangroves are, and we're aware that some of them are being destroyed. But the ones that we do have, we're trying to map them for future reference to see, okay, what's affecting them, trends in how can we improve them. Then we have our GPS systems. So those are global positioning systems. They collect data points for creation of maps. For us to accurately represent things, we need our data points. So I can tell, like, we're all Caribbean. We all exist in the Caribbean. If I tell somebody, hey, can you give me directions to such and such? Oh, over there goes so blah, blah, blah. No, we want specific. So we want the coordinates. Now, again, we use surveys and we develop them through our COBOL toolbox. This is used to capture responses for target populations during our on-field activities. And this as well will help with us gauging our target population, see their perceptions into certain ideas for project developments and stuff. So what gives the Department of Environment this power? So we have the Environmental Protection and Management Act, the EPMA 2019. This outlines the mandate of the department to monitor environmental concerns falling within the borders of Antigua and Barbuda. So specifically, in Part 10, Environmental Information, the DMU is responsible for operationalizing this section. So, and I think this section speaks about, but I'll get into that. So we're speaking about collecting the data. So where are we going to store this data now? The DMU is adequately managing data, and the development of environmental information systems are necessary. So EIS systems, that is my job title. So these EIS systems, first of all, when you hear EIS systems, what would just come to your mind? It's an online platform for where we store this data. But different from other information systems, this is environmental data. So anything historical, present, and for future reference will be stored on these information systems. So to date, the Department of Environment has commissioned the National Environmental Data and Information System, as well as the National Resource Inventory. This was done in 2021 in the month of September. During this year, we're planning to commission the Environmental Registry and the NDC Web Tracker. I have a picture here of the Environment Registry. Yes. Now, just to touch on the Environment Registry a bit. This system has been developed by one of our many projects, the CBIT, the Capacity Building for Improved Transparency Project, and it will house the country's monitoring, reporting, and verification system. So the MRV system will comprise of indicators. The indicators are separated into thematic themes. We have loss and damage that everyone knows about. We have adaptation, mitigation, climate finance. All this will be captured in our environment registry. So we have some key features here, EPMA documents. These documents could be our EIA reports, environmental impact assessment reports. We have our MRV system, like I said, the rosters, the notices, and the rosters could be, the rosters are like environmental consultants, persons that are within our field that are of importance. So persons can have an easy contact to you, say, okay, I'm looking for someone that is in water quality, someone from marine, so like that. So, remember I said it will be commissioned. Here, it will be launched on the 23rd of March 2023. That's, February. February. Apologies. And I said apologies to Alia because she's the project coordinator for it. Sorry, boss. Yes. Now, how is the DOE using science for decision making? All right. With the acquisition of the data provided by our stakeholders, the DOE has been developing projects and national programs focusing on improving conditions created by our climate change. Or these projects and programs in turn create baseline data or additional data for further project development. So I provided some list of our projects and our programs. So we have our National Adaptation Plan, renewable projects, part of 2020, our Enhanced Direct Access, and our Water Quality Program. I'm going to touch on just a few of these projects in this slide, or evidence of science within these projects. Now, the NAP is focused on developing adaptations plans to enhance the adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to address effects on climate change in Antigua and Barbuda. So it's done through 6 sectoral plans under the development. So we have the tourism, finance, wholesale and retail, cultural and heritage, infrastructure, housing, sorry about that, and food and security. Now, within the NAP, you have the local area adaptation plans as well. So this is focused on including social, economic, and physical actions to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change. So with the 6 sectoral plans, we're trying to, again, promote our industries to think climate change. How are we going to promote our industries into the future? We're looking at helping them to upgrade. So we have infrastructure. When you think about infrastructure, think about our buildings, our roads, food security. How can we help our linkages? And then for social and physical action plans, these could be community meetings, improvement of our water channels, as we will see in the next slide. So the development of culverts in the Cashuel and McKinnon's area, it was done to combat the area, because the area is known to be flood prone. So there was a vulnerability study that was done many years ago, then a hydrological study, which focused on saying that we need to strengthen the water channels. And these water channels, the improvement is increasing the width of it. So we're seeing that if you look at Cashuel, or even McKinnon's, you see that the culverts are much wider and it's providing direction to where the water is flowing, because don't quote me, right? Yeah, I think it was, I'm joking. So in 2021, we all aware of what happened in November with the flooding. Oh, yeah. You all remember? Yes. So the creation of the culverts is to provide a direction for the water, and, you know. Yeah. So lastly, development of our GHG inventories. So the GHG inventories are done to track our emissions. I know everyone hears about the below 1.5 degrees. How we get into it? So what we do is we do these calculations every 2 years, every 3 years, and we're just basically tracking our estimates. And these help in our project development. And I have an example through our adaptation fund, small innovative grants project. With this project is looking on water scarcity on farms, but what it's using is climate smart agriculture technology. Now, most persons, if you say that, well, what does that mean? So we're using solar powered reverse osmosis plants to help in the production of water, clean water for the plants and stuff like that. And that is taken away from the gas generation that will cause the fumes and emissions that we spoke about. Now, the final point. How does the data collected inform our next steps? So the data collected from the projects are characterized as baseline data. Baseline data are the foundation for future projects upscale, as it provides the implementing entity the necessary information to guide the project development in terms of financing, course of action, and public perception to the idea. The projects that have been developed by the DRE are pilot studies which are geared at generating these baseline data, which will be used for upscale and alter future development as we maintain our commitments to the NDC targets. Future benefits are directed to the national programs such as our water quality program, as well as feeding into our state of environmental bulletin and report. And I think that's the end. I'm not sure if questions are there for me or if we have
They will be at the end of the last presentation. So Martin, please write down your question. Everybody thank Mr. Jabari Reynolds for his presentation. And last but not least, we are going to invite, let me put on my French accent. Geneviève Renobert. That was terrible. I'm sorry, France. And Canada. We're going to invite Jen and Molly from the Elkhorn Marine Conservancy to give us our final presentation for this section. And they will be talking about their work underwater. So I hope you all have your snorkel gear on. I hope you have on your wetsuit, your fins, and we're ready to go. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Shauna. We are so incredibly grateful to be here. Good morning to everyone. My name is Jen, and this is Dr. Molly Wilson, my colleague, and we are project managers and marine scientists at the Elkhorn Marine Conservancy. Now, just show of hands, who knows about the EMC? Okay, I think it's like a little bit better than last year. We're working on it. If you have any pointers on how we can better be in the spotlight, then let me know. The EAG does an amazing job, so we're trying to mimic them. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about our work, which is focused on restoring Antigua's reefs, and we're specifically going to be talking about how we use data to inform our decisions, but also how we use it to inform policy recommendations. So here's our mission statement. Our mission is to enhance the resilience and local stewardship of Antigua's marine ecosystems through restoration, collaborative management, and conservation. And all of EMC's activities and work is based on our 4 core pillars. So science, engagement, education, and advocacy. And today we're going to be really focusing on these 2 first ones, science and engagement. We are going to be speaking specifically about how we collect data in multiple ways. The first is how we collect data within our coral nurseries, how we track success, and how we track their growth rates. And then also, once we've planted those corals on the reef, how do we track how they're growing and influencing the marine ecology around them? And then as well as collecting data on the other marine ecosystems around reefs, so seagrass beds and mangroves, and how we assess the state of health within the area of interest that we work. And then finally, looking at the benefits that these ecosystems provide to our stakeholder communities and how those stakeholder communities can have an impact on the areas in which we work. Now, just to be specific, we are currently working within the Northeast Marine Management Area, which is on the north and east side of Antigua, and we're focused right now in the Nonsuch Bay area, so just beside the Freetown and Willacrease community, by Green Island and York Island. And we hope that as the organization grows, we'll be restoring reefs and other marine ecosystems throughout the entire Nama region. So another show of hands, who here knows about the process of coral gardening? Okay, a few of you know, great. So I'll just run through it really quickly for those of you who have never seen this. Corals are extremely important animals within coral reefs, just like trees are important in a forest. And in the last few decades, we've lost an incredible amount of coral coverage. So a lot of those corals have died. And some of them, which were keystone species, which means extremely important species in the Caribbean, like this Elkhorn coral here, are now critically endangered animals, which means if we don't work to restore their populations, they might actually go extinct. And so the process of restoring a reef or restoring coral coverage onto the reef, and the way that we do it involves going into the wild, finding colonies of corals that are living and thriving despite all odds, taking a little tiny piece of that colony, and then coming back to our underwater nurseries and placing them on a rope and letting them grow in that protected and managed environment. So you can imagine we might take a piece that is as big as my hand and we'll cut it into 10 pieces, or we'll take a branch for some of the branching corals that look more like, or a staghorn coral that look a little bit thinner and longer, we might cut that into 40 pieces. And then we'll watch those pieces of corals grow into larger fragments. Now, this picture was taken maybe a year after the coral was placed in the nursery, and you can see that the small piece of coral there has started to grow these beautiful hands. And what we'll do in the next step of the process is actually cut those off and go into a degraded reef system like here, and we will physically glue them onto the degraded reef structure. And we use Portland cement or marine epoxy, so nothing fancy there. In the first part that I just described, in the nursery part, what we're really interested in seeing is how are our species doing? So our objective is identifying the coral genotypes, the specific genetically distinct corals. How are they doing? Are they growing fast? Are they surviving? Are they showing any genetic resilience to stressors like heat or disease, for example? And so what we do is we do exactly that. We track that. We have what we call a gene bank, which is a section of the nursery that contains at least 4 pieces of every genotype in our nursery. And for the corals, staghorn and fused staghorn, we actually measure them every month for the first 8 months. And so we can physically track their growth. And then for corals like the Elkhorn coral here, which is a little bit harder to measure because it kind of grows in every direction, what we do is we measure the number of appendages that start to grow off this main piece. So the yellow here would be the original piece that we collected, and this beautiful kind of tutu skirt is the new appendage that the Elkhorn is growing. You can also tell that there was a line here holding it on to the structure, and that it's completely covered the line. And so this coral is doing particularly well. And then we also collect other data, such as water quality, data, and we observe occurrences of disease and blooms in cyanobacteria, algae, and other predators like crabs and oysters. And we see which of these genotypes are our best players. After we plant them, we also want to see, okay, they were doing well in the nursery, but how are they doing at the restoration sites? We have 3 restoration sites, which means 3 degraded reefs on which we plant. And so we check success, which essentially means survivorship, and growth, or coral growth on each one of these sites. We also take photo records, and what we also do is photomosaics on 2 distinct plots. Photomosaics is essentially creating a 3D map of the sea floor, and so we did a baseline one, and then as we plant in that area, we'll continue to make those 3D maps to see how is the coral growing and is that creating habitat space for fish. We also are running agra, fish, and benthic surveys just to see, okay, how is the environment before we planted and how is it after we've planted? Are those planted corals providing any type of ecosystem benefits to the fish and invertebrates that like to live on a reef? And again, we collect a bunch of complementary data, just as I was saying, water quality, disease, bleaching, predation, and competition.
Great, so as Jen mentioned, we also collect data on ecosystem health, which at the moment is focused in the Non-Such Bay area. So we do, like Relita mentioned from national parks, we do agra surveys on coral reefs. We also do surveys on seagrass beds and mangrove forests. And in addition to this quantitative data, we also do water quality testing, but we also take qualitative data on physical site properties, different observed anthropogenic impacts, and observe uses by different stakeholders. And the objectives here are really to assess the health of the ecosystems and their capacity to provide ecosystem services to the stakeholders in the area where we work. We also collect complementary social data. So we identify stakeholder uses and local impacts of the ecosystems that we work in by phone calls and in-person interviews, as well as different community open house exhibits and expos. And this goes along with the ecosystem health data that I just mentioned as well. And the goals here are really just to identify ecosystem services provided to the stakeholder community, as well as the different local impacts to these ecosystems. And so how do we use all this data that we've been collecting? For the first example, I'll just touch on how we use our nursery and restoration site monitoring data that Jen spoke about. We analyze this to enable us to select resilient coral genotypes. So from the growth tracking both in the nursery and on the outplants, we can identify which of the genotypes, of which we have about just over 50 genotypes right now, which of them are performing best and which are performing best under certain conditions. So certain ones might like certain outplanting sites, or they may be resistant to different diseases, but they have slower growth. So it's been really important for us to be able to track that. We've also used our ecological data to identify restoration sites that we want to focus on at this stage in our project. And we can also identify benefits from restoration activities to the overall ecology of the reefs that we're planting in. So just for a quick example of that, when we were choosing our restoration sites, just a little bit less than a year ago, we used a lot of benthic data to figure out what the actual benthic composition looked like in these different reefs. And for this round of outplanting, I mean, all of the reefs that we're working in the area that we're working in need a lot of assistance, but we were trying to start by focusing on reefs that actually a lot of the coral was dead, but they had a lot of factors that would facilitate coral growth were those corals to be reintroduced. So we're looking for places that have a lot of crustose coralline algae, which is this pink algae that kind of forms a cement on the reef. It's really good for enabling corals to grow. It also attracts more juvenile corals. And also we're looking for areas that have low levels of macroalgae, which can be toxic to corals. So the sites that we chose, for the most part, have more of this CCA, which is in the pink here, and less of the macroalgae, which is in the dark green, than the other sites we surveyed. Another example is how we've been using our monitoring ecosystem health and stakeholder data. This has been really influential in helping us identify policy proposals, essentially. So we've used this to designate proposed zones for stakeholder uses, restoration, and conservation within the Nonsuch Bay and the Green Island area. This is all hopefully in conjunction with the EAG's Offshore Islands Nature Reserve. We've also used this data to help propose specific regulations that would enhance ecosystem health as well as benefits to stakeholders, and also identify sustainable financing mechanisms that would decrease local impacts and help finance management and enforcement. So just a quick example within that umbrella, these are some of the data from our seagrass surveys, and you can see, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, but there's an invasive seagrass here that tends to do really well in areas that get cleared, where the other where the native seagrass species have been damaged. It colonizes it a lot more quickly. So you can see that specifically in areas where you have a lot of anchor damage or boat damage to the seagrass. And here that's represented in the red is the invasive species. And you can see this is very prominent in two of the major anchoring spots around Green Island. So this type of data really helps bolster our proposal for moorings in these areas to preserve the health of these ecosystems. So that's what we have for today. Thank you guys so much for putting this really important event together and inviting us to speak. And if you'd like to know more about our programs, definitely feel free to reach out to us, or Shannon, our communications director in the back, also has some pamphlets about what we're working on and sustainable seafood guides. So definitely talk to her as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely. So it is finally now time for the questions that everybody had been writing down in preparation for this moment. So, okay, I see a hand up already. Josh is there, so we'll go to the gentleman from AUA, and then we'll go to Martin.
Thank you, all the speakers. What fantastic presentations from everyone. That was really interesting. The last, the Elkhorn group, I just had a couple of questions about when you say you have the genotypes, are you talking about you've just looked at specific genes within the genome? And who does your sequencing? How do you get your sequencing done?
Is this one? Yeah, okay, so we don't have the capacity to sequence them right now, but we track them based on the colonies that we collect from. So when we sample, we GPS tag and photographically track the specific colony, and then all the samples that we take from that are assumed to be genetically identical to the parent. And then we have a spatial buffer before which we'll collect another colony, or you can also look for things like non-fissures between the two different genotypes. Yeah. We would love to sequence them. So, yeah. Okay, that would be amazing.
AUA, y'all collaborating with everybody. We love to see it. I hope you're collaborating with EAG too. Let's take it to Martin.
Possibly being a bit contentious to the gentleman as Jamari from the data collection unit. I see that you're looking for participation in data collection. I'm a big fan of citizen science, but I don't really see much of that happening in Antigua. And I feel that it's an important and a worthwhile step, because people will then feel engaged and have a sense of ownership and all the benefits that that brings. Is there a move to move to that kind of thing? And secondly, and relatedly, it strikes me that there's very few government agencies involved in your data collection, and considering the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, etc., it concerns me in terms of trying to achieve those many, many goals. And thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. Yes, we are actually trying to get more community-based data collection. So for the mention of Will's Recycling, I actually got in contact with him through a connection. I was actually doing a waste questionnaire for the UNSD, and that interaction with Will showed me that there are potential within our communities, but it takes connection, and I think forums like this provides the department or even organizations to meet face to face, say this is what we're doing, this is what we're working on, and then we find synergies, such as what AUA is doing with the gene sequencing and stuff like that. So I believe as well as another thing for the project, the CBIT project, what we're trying to do as well is we're trying to sensitize our population to environmental information systems. So we were going to different government agencies, but then we focused on private sectors because we're trying to get the buy-in. But I think, again, what you're saying is correct. We need to focus on our communities because they are the driving force. They are the population that we need to win over. The second question, I'm sorry.
Second question was government agencies.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be few in numbers are participating with you, and I say that in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, which we've just gone beyond the halfway point. And I don't see an awful lot of data and stuff coming out of Antigua in that space. And if we don't keep in a track of the data, we don't know what we're managing. And it strikes me that we're going to have another big fat failure like the Millennium Development Goals were as well, which is such a pity because we're in that crucial 10-year period of all these big decisions being made, whether it be in Antigua or globally, of how the future looks. Thank you.
Okay. For that, during my time in the department, I first came on as an intern, as a monitoring, reporting, and verification intern, and I was really tasked with collecting data. And again, with the government institutions, what I really found was that they do collect the data, but then there's not a mandate for them to share the data or to even report about the data. They will look at you and they would probably say, yeah, we have it, but then why should we share it? But again, I will use the word gentleman's agreement, and you move on to probably the MOUs, you have to first strike a common ground with them for them to understand this is what the data will be used for. And again, like I touched on the NAP, when we were focusing on the different sectors, we have to show them this is what we're envisioning for our country. If we can get you on board, we can be a beacon of light probably in the Caribbean region and again showcase that our country can go forward. I think I answered the question. Not sure if anybody from my department has anything to chime in with. No? No?
Hi, so I just want to mention a point about the SDGs. That actually falls under foreign affairs. We do assist in terms of the environmental indicators, but they did just launch a website where they upload the data and how they're tracking the various SDGs. And we do have buy-in from a lot of government agencies. As he mentioned earlier, we have the MOU with statistics, and we also work with that Transport Board. We're trying to assist them with collecting the data that we have gaps in, but we do have a relationship with them. We meet monthly through our technical advisory committee, so we do have the work has started.
And then to thank you for that question, because I think citizen science is important. We need everybody to work with us, everybody to work together, not with us, because at the end of the day, we're working towards the same common goal, I imagine, in terms of, well, on my side, the biodiversity, conservation, sustainable use, and it's important that we collect data. So yes, as the COP in December for the biodiversity convention, we finally, after 4 years, approved the Global Biodiversity Framework. That is what we will now then go and align our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to that. It's 23 targets. And when we get to the stage of doing that alignment process, we will have to, and we want to work with community groups, with NGOs, with government agencies to figure out how we're going to align that biodiversity framework with our strategy and action plan, and then how we're going to collect the data and how everybody will play a part in collecting of data. So yes, the communities would have to be involved, NGOs would have to be involved, academia, like Professor Cross up there, he's already involved in data collection. And yes, so for sure, yes, it's something that we have to promote, that we have to continue doing, because no data, you can't plan, you can't move forward, you can't improve, you can't conserve, you can't use biodiversity sustainably. So it's essentially, it's extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you to all the representatives of the DOE who chirped in on that question. I love it. We have another question from Wendy.
Yes, I have two questions. One for Mr. Reynolds and Ms. Fireman. Do you make recommendations for these flood-prone areas where people are building homes to elevate or to come up from so close to the ground to prevent flooding in their homes?
I know of the a newly formed building code plan. Building code plan. In a sense, it's trying to bring our homes to Cat 5, as well as, again, for flooding. But what we did is, with the vulnerability study, is that we try to improve the water channels. So I think that answers the question.
I know, but some persons have already built in these water-prone areas. And also, Ms. Fireman, do you have problems with persons taking eggs or animals, eating or with these eggs, the turtle eggs?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have had very limited reports of that happening in the last year that I've been here, but I would be very hesitant to say that it doesn't happen. Yeah.
Good morning. I have two questions for Molly and Jen. So the first thing is the survivorship bank, the gene bank. I think that's an excellent idea, and I wanted to know if all the corals that you are growing in that bank, if all of them are collected in the NEMA. Yeah, okay. And do you guys think it would be wise to get corals outside of the NEMA okay. And secondly, the choice of restoration sites. You spoke about the Benthic data study that guided the choosing of these sites. How did you go about this Benthic data study?
How did you go about doing the Benthic data study to be able to choose your sites for restoration?
Thank you. Those are all great questions. And I should have also pointed out that when we were choosing the restoration sites, there were a lot of different factors as well, ecological, including fish populations and other herbivores, as well as social in terms of accessibility to people, reduced risk of other human impacts, like a lot of boating activity. But in terms of the actual benthic surveys, they are essentially agri-surveys, slightly modified. Yes, which is belt transects, 10-meter belt transects. Jen should be saying this because she does them. But essentially, they're point intercept. So every point along the line, you identify what is there. I'm sure you're familiar as well. And then we also measure canopy height of the algae to try and get a better sense of the abundance of macroalgae as well.
Great. We have another question from Martin.
I think one thing, if I might add, is that it would be really interesting to start mixing genotypes from the south in National Parks Authority jurisdiction area. And we've been talking to Rulio Camacho about doing that, and it's something that we're really excited about doing.
One final question. I think the government agencies might be best to answer this. There's an elephant in the room that we're not talking about, and from my experience, this is the complete and utter failure of the Development Control Authority to live up to their mandate of the Physical Planning Act and the regulations and so forth that are there. A lot of the problems that we're talking about with regard to flooding and so on speaks to that. How do we tackle that? Because it seems to be such a politically charged situation that nobody wants to address it. And it's from what's happening in Yorks to the UDA project and PLH, etc. Thank you.
Government agencies? I'll let you all respond to that question. government agencies and
answer?
statutory
Okay,
bodies.
So let me answer for the National Parks Authority, and I'm going to go back and answer Wendy's question in terms of homes and collaboration with the DCA, and I'm also going to bring us back to data collection and how and why we do it. So government's pool of resources is not infinite, and over many decades, those of us who have to do data collection have had to fight with the same pots of money that would go to healthcare and education. That is always a challenge. And quite frankly, a lot of our data collection, our programmatic data collection activities are not the largest percentage of our data collection. We only collect data when we are forced to report and when there's some kind of funding opportunity or there's an international requirement. Our culture in Antigua and Barbuda of collecting data to inform decisions is very poor, and the public does not demand it. We went through a whole election cycle where even economic data was not discussed. Everybody was discussing things and nobody referencing any data sources. So we have to admit to ourselves that our public don't care about data. They just want to see whatever they have in their mind. So it's quite a challenge. In terms of how we're working together, I want to also point out that it doesn't make sense for 6 different agencies to be collecting the same data, right? So in terms of, and then I want to make a point about citizen science. I can collect data and you can collect data, and then when we come together, it actually doesn't make sense, right? Nonsense in is nonsense out. I did my CXC biology and I did not do the experiment. I tasted the water and I did and I wrote up the lab, right? I can make data say what I want it to say if I have the type of backing. So you have to be very careful in terms of what the motives for data collection are. And this is where the policy backing, and this is why I started my presentation in saying, before you start collecting data, be very clear in terms of the effect you want to make, right? Now, there are other data collection that are done for finding out information that you don't know. And that is also useful, and that is where academic institutions come in. We really need that detailed taxonomic work. Because more and more what we're realizing is that in conservation, we're not trying to bring back something as it was in the 1960s. That has gone, it's changed. When we are moving forward, we're moving forward to something we have no idea what it will look like. We do not know what it would look like. If we get a Category 5 hurricane in Antigua, all of our ecosystems, even if they are resilient and they come back, they will come back different. So there's a need to recognize that we always have to take a rolling baseline. You cannot depend on data from 1984 to make a decision today. You need to go back today, you need to check the changes. So this habit of programmatic checking needs to become a habit. And then what do you do once you have that information? Sometimes you do nothing, you just check again. Sometimes when you check, it depends on what the data is saying. So if the data is saying, hey, something is going wrong over here, then you go back and find why is it going wrong. And this is where we need support. Government's role is actually to do the programmatic work. And Martin is right. The programmatic work is not being done all the time. Maybe it's not being done frequently enough, but the fact is that we are still a developing country. And if you had to choose between whether you could go to the clinic and whether you have data on the coral species in the NEMA, I know what I would choose. If you had to choose between your child getting a free secondary education and knowing what species of tamarind tree is out there, you know what you would choose. So at the end of the day, we have to be very honest and realistic with where we are. There are niches that each institution and organization can fill, and it is important that we don't expect government to do everything. One thing that I say is that we should become more familiar with what government agencies are doing, because there's quite a lot of information out there if you look for it, and we need to engage the government agencies. Government agencies are actually doing a lot. People out there have information that they're not reporting to the government agency, And unless you choose to interact with that government agency, information is power, data is power. If you don't step out and start the interaction, you will never have the information. One more thing, we have MOUs with both the EAG and with the EMC. We recognize in the National Parks Authority we can't do it alone. We work closely with all the government agencies. It's just to pick up a call, find a friend in the government agency, and you will get your work done. It's hard to find a friend, but once you've made the friend and y'all know y'all have the same outcomes, you're looking for the same result, your friend will be the friend for life. Y'all can fall out and cuss today, and then you'll be back together tomorrow. What is the issue is when a mistrust develops, where you use the information that an agency has given you to bring that same agency down, and we have seen that happening over and over again. We need to be trusting each other. We're all working towards the same purpose, I hope. And instead of criticizing outside, let's work together to build each other up.
I think that was a good way to kind of pull everything together. Thank you, Relita. I want to give a round of applause again to our panelists. Thank you so much for giving us your time, for doing your presentations. A lot of times in Antigua, we like to say, nobody now do nothing, right? Oh, y'all silent. And in Barbuda, y'all not outside, right? We like to say that nobody now do nothing, right? But here we have, especially in science, right? In the STEM field. So it is so encouraging, I think, to see the amazing work that all of these agencies are doing, the collaborations that we have between government, statutory bodies, NGOs, community-based organizations, etc., and the things that we have in common. We all have data gaps. We all need more money and resources to be able to identify and deal with these data gaps. And we all have this same goal that we're working to, right? And with that, I am going to invite everybody to transition to the lunch section.